one of the greatest challenges we all face is how do we disagree well without dehumanizing the people we're disagreeing with? I'd never heard of Wes Huff till somebody pointed out an episode of the Joe Rogan show where he interviewed the Christian apologist. And very quickly, as you watch that episode of Joe Rogan, you discover there's a backstory behind Wes's appearance. And what struck me initially in his interaction with Joe Rogan, but then as I watched the debate he had with Billy Carson, was a few things. One is Wes Huff did so much better than I could ever hope to do in that kind of setting. He really knew what he was talking about. But three, he really didn't dehumanize or react. I want to have a look at Wes Huff's interactions, first with Billy Carson, then with Joe Rogan, and see what we can learn about what it means to engage with people who think differently, but do it in a way that is productive and doesn't dehumanize. Before we go too much further, you, like me, probably need some background. You probably come from a different background to me, but when I first heard about a Carson being involved in debates about the Bible, this is who I thought of, D.A. Carson. He's quite a famous New Testament scholar. That's not who we're talking about. We're talking about Billy Carson. Let me introduce you to Billy Carson. This is the Forbidden Knowledge TV network that is all about, as you can see, Billy Carson, and he's quite pleased to have his Joe Rogan moment there, along with all these videos that talk about aliens and super self and quantum minds. And very quickly you discover finance is involved in a lot in what he does, and he's quite keen to help you find money through his weird and wacky ideas. I'd never heard of him, but he has written a bunch of books with some grandiose kind of titles, such as The Origins of Humanity, Woke Doesn't Mean Broke, and you'll see his books aren't cheap. All of this comes out of his YouTube channel, the Forbidden Knowledge Podcast Network. And a quick look at that shows you that there's just a lot of wacky stuff there that I would struggle to believe that anybody takes seriously. But the truth is, Billy Carson has made, and is proud to boast about, making millions of dollars from people who believe it. And he has made a whole lot of claims about the Bible, which brings us to Wes Huff. Now, we have excerpts of the discussion that Billy Carson had with Wes Huff. What I'm going to do is play some of them for you, but what you'll see here is that this was the original debate. The man in the middle was Billy Carson's friend, one of the few people that went to his wedding. He has his own podcast, and Billy Carson had been saying he just wants to find a Christian to debate him because no Christians are up for the discussion. So he felt a little bit inadequate about his own capacity to engage with the deep issues. So he reached out to Wes Huff and said, would you be open to coming and having a discussion with Billy Carson? Wes Huff has already known about Billy Carson and some of the claims he's made about the Bible. And right here is where I start learning from Wes Huff. You see, if I was coming into a discussion like this, I would have wanted to beat Billy Carson. I still feel a bit angry about Billy Carson and some of the the ways he's extracted money from people and the claims he's made about the Bible. And so I think I would come into something like this ready to want to launch out. But as we begin, let's see how Wes Huff begins.
Yeah, well, first let me say I think it's really cool to not just be in the room proverbially with you, Billy, but be able to interact with you. Because I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, Toronto, Canada, is a long way away from Florida. It's a little bit of a jaunt. But I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts.
So can you see how Wes Huff starts? He starts positively, and he's actually been looking forward to this. He only had 24 hours notice, but he was familiar with some of Billy Carson's work. Apparently, Billy Carson is quite known on YouTube, and some of his YouTube videos have been quite popular. But one of the things, and this right up front, was I saw Wes Huff engage with Billy Carson like this, I realised that there is still an immaturity in me that means I don't know that I'd be safe to have a discussion like this. And so already I'm learning from Wes Huff. I think another thing to learn from Wes Huff is how he begins. He doesn't begin by making points. Look at how he does begin.
Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible called, I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain.
Okay, so already, rather than getting into Wes trying to prove himself in any kind of sense, he starts by asking questions. And particularly, because this is about the Bible, one of the things that Billy Carson makes a big deal about is the Sinai Bible and how that was written before the King James version of the Bible, and that in the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified. I appreciate the YouTube channel, What Do You Meme? They put together this collection of other times that Billy Carson had previously quoted the Sinai Bible as the authority.
Never got crucified. As a matter of fact, the Sinai Bible, Jesus was crucified.
Well, that doesn't exist in the Sinai Bible.
The Sinai Bible. The Sinai Bible. But then you go to the Sinai Bible. In the Sinai Bible.
And the Sinai Bible. According to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible.
So Wes Huff knows all this, and that's why he begins like this.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus? Like the codex that comes... Okay.
So there we have the start of this discussion, and you can see what Wes Huff has done. It's what I find really helpful in thinking about dealing or engaging with people I disagree with. He has started by asking questions and working out what the ground is.
So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture.
So now that Wes understands what's going on, what he very quickly does is say, okay, this is the ground on which I'm standing. This is the data I have to engage with the ideas that you have.
And particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office.
So at this point, it becomes clear that Wes and Billy are on quite different footings. Billy has bought a copy of what he calls the Sinai Bible from Amazon. Wes has a copy of the original manuscript.
So I have it here. And the only reason I ask for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of...
So before we get to the data, can you hear what he's doing? And this is what I find so helpful. The challenge to not quickly go in to win a war, but to seek to understand before being understood. But once you understand, then to be able to convey the data you do have, not in a way that is seeking to dehumanize, but just in a way that seeking hopefully to illuminate.
Kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified.
And this in the debate goes on, and despite the fact that Billy Carson has referenced the Sinai Bible many, many times in other places, he quickly decides this is a losing battle. And so let's see where it goes next.
The text where I was referencing, actually, I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
So it seems fairly clear that Billy Carson had been using the Sinai Bible as a point of reference to say that Jesus wasn't crucified. And very quickly in the discussion, that bit of ground that he had been standing on was taken away from him, and he gave it up very quickly and moved to talking about the Gospel of Barnabas, thinking that he'd be on firmer ground.
So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with, there are 2 manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's...
So again, Billy Carson is confronted with Wes, and can you see Wes is not, his voice isn't in any way angry, or he's not pushing an agenda. He just is bringing the data. And again, the data takes the ground away from Billy Carson.
I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery and you're expert, I'm going to go with that.
As the temptation would be for me to want to beat Billy Carson. Well, Billy Carson's going to keep changing the tax he's coming from, and you'll do your head in. So that's why it's important for you to know the ground you're standing on, and so now Billy Carson changes it to the Old Testament.
Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit. A lot of this information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I have found, that it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never reference that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
So Billy Carson's argument here is that the Old Testament is just an amalgamation of other documents from other sources. Now, Wes Huff later will acknowledge that he's not an Old Testament scholar, but he manages to respond fairly well. But before he does, notice what happens.
Have you read the Enumalish?
Yeah, I've done lectures.
Do you mind? Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Enumalish for us?
So one of the things Billy Carson said subsequent to this debate was that he didn't get enough time to be heard, to share his understanding of things. Well, this is just one example of where I had to speed it up 10 times. His argument that he didn't get enough time to talk, I think, rings a little hollow as you watch the video. He certainly has plenty of time to talk. Because now Wes finally...
Mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a Syriologist friend and we walked through it a couple of years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said.
So can you see what he's doing is trying to engage with Billy on Billy's terms using Billy's frameworks.
What are the actual kind of parallels there that you're you're looking to. Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
So can you see what he's done? He's invited Billy to engage, to explain his own framework, which it took a long time to do. And now he's asking another question and saying, let's dive into that. That actually, if people are not standing on a firm foundation, the most effective thing you can do is to ask questions rather than pointing the weakness of their foundation out to them.
So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text.
Okay, that I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're making this the argument, because if you brought it up, and I mean this with all due respect.
So you can see here what he's doing is engaging with Billy's arguments as best he can. And what I find interesting is whenever Wes is moving forward, there isn't actually able to be a dialogue. And my sense is for a lot of people who hold firmly to positions they haven't really thought through, and who may be really strong proponents of those positions, dialoguing will be a lot like this. This contrasts with Wes's conversation with Joe Rogan shortly, but let's finish here.
There are superficial parallels, I would agree, the separation of the water, the concept of the earth being formless and void, that's also in the Enuma Elish. However, I think all the other details, it's the details that make the difference. And if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, you don't have a creation within 7 days. You don't
going to take the Enuma Elish and put it into the biblical text. There are certain words that they utilize that let me know that they copied it from that text. Like, for example,
so what words?
Separating the water from the waters, the void, the earth being void. That information is literally just copied over. So it tells you that somebody saw that and said, let me add it to this book right here. Or let me add it to the scripture or this papyrus, because it wasn't a book yet at that time.
So was this text discovered?
So here we have one of the things that happens right the way through this debate, if we would call it a debate, that the moderator or the host jumps in and sort of takes things off on a bit of a tangent, and that happens a fair bit. And so there aren't lots of examples of being able to follow an argument through to conclusion. You can watch the whole of the debate. I recommend it. It's certainly fascinating, and like me, you might find that you learn something. Like I found myself deeply challenged as I watched Wes operate here.
It's all oral history, even the Bible.
Okay, so when we're engaging with oral history, what methodologies are you using to confirm that the orality is accurate?
And this strategy in particular I find very helpful, and it sort of helps me put a tool in the toolkit, I think. Rather than dealing with the presenting issue, you ask questions that get behind the presenting issue to what is the framework that brought you to that conclusion? Why do you trust that idea? And when you can get to talking about frameworks, then you can start to have a productive discussion. One of the things you'll find is that, particularly for people who have an investment in a way of seeing the world, they won't be quick to respond to questions that call their frameworks into question, because they probably are not even aware of the frameworks that they have used.
Well, first and foremost, some of these texts cultures have written down information in caves. You've got cave paintings. The Dogon tribe actually have not only written down.
Sure. No, I don't disagree with that. The question is one of historic. sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. The question is one of methodological analysis. So you have to have a method by which you can find either that something is falsifiable or that there are avenues by which you can show internal and external accuracy of credibility. So this is what we do with documents.
So I just find this really helpful. And again, it's this challenge. I think what I see in the discussion with Billy is he is warm. He spent a lot of time listening, but he then starts taking some of the arguments away. And once the arguments are there on the table, he raises these questions about frameworks. And I think this, in terms of dialoguing with people who see the world differently to you, this is a really helpful strategy to be saying, okay, how did you get to that worldview? And yeah, okay, that's that, but that's not really answering the question of how you got there.
This is what we do with the ancient gospels. This is what I do. I've worked on Xenophon and Plutarch, and we look at the internal evidences and the external multivalent corroboration to try to figure out, okay, yes, we have all these stories. Great. I don't deny that. But as a historian, as someone who's trying to figure out what is accurate, how do you know if I use the term verisimilitude, do you know what that term means?
And it very quickly became obvious that it really wasn't a fair discussion, that Wes was operating up here and Billy was operating down there. But the concern about that is that Billy is raising literally millions of dollars from people who believe him. So it was this debate that came to Joe Rogan's attention, because Joe Rogan had, as we've already seen, had Billy Carson on only about 6 months before this. And as we come to have a look at Wes's interaction with Joe Rogan, one of the things I think it's important to differentiate, when he's talking with Billy Carson, he's talking with somebody who has a set worldview that he's trying to challenge. When he's talking with Joe Rogan, he's speaking with someone who is genuinely interested and is perhaps even exploring himself, but also is someone who comes from a different value set. So I need to warn you now, if you are sensitive to strong language, there will be some strong language in some of how Joe Rogan expresses himself. So just be warned.
Wes, very nice to meet you.
Joe, pleasure.
So I, like many people, was introduced to you because of the debate that you had with Billy Carson.
Quote unquote.
You know, it's one of those things where it's very unfortunate when people get caught with their pants down. But when he was on with you, it was quite apparent that you are an actual expert in the Bible and in many religious texts, and that he didn't necessarily have the facts straight.
I find it interesting that here Joe Rogan, probably one of the most influential people in the world in media at the moment, calling Wes an expert. And Wes doesn't go, no, I'm not. Wes just acknowledges, this is where my study's been. I actually do know a little bit about this stuff. And while Wes doesn't shy away from acknowledging that he is an expert, one of the things that becomes really clear is the number of times Wes acknowledges he doesn't know things.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't know. They must have been a rich schizophrenic person. Well, it's a good question. I don't know in terms of his education.
I find it so helpful just to see that and see the difference between somebody who's trying to sell you something or who is standing on ground that is shaky and somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. Is somebody who knows what they're talking about knows when they don't know what they're talking about.
I see people like Billy Carson talk about being able to read Sumerian. I'm like, dude,
And so here he is pointing out that while he knows a lot of the limits he has, he's fascinated that Billy Carson makes claims to be able to read this ancient language.
I've tried and I can't make heads or tails of Sumerian.
Yeah.
So
that's a tell.
Unfortunately, it kind of gives away.
Listen, I like Billy. He was a nice guy. I really enjoyed talking to him. I really do. I think his videos are fun. But I also think truth is important.
I have no problem with him as an individual.
He just needs to course correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, course correct and recognize what you know and what you don't know.
And so here you can see already that the difference between somebody who's trying to defend a position and somebody who's actually up for a discussion. And what Joe Rogan is saying is truth matters. And in all this, what is clear is to be able to dialogue with someone like Joe Rogan, you do need to know what ground you're standing on.
You're not doing people a service, especially people like myself that aren't educated in this. Like we turn to others who claim to have a vast knowledge of this to help me out. Tell me what's going on. When I sit down and talk to you, tell me what's going on. And
this for me is where we now need to be so concerned, because there's thousands of people claiming to be experts, but very few people actually have done the work to know what they're talking about. And so for us as individuals, it's really important to know what we can talk about with any level of expertise and what we can't talk about.
If you don't really know, you're fucking over a lot of people, unfortunately, for yourself.
And again, I've chosen to leave the language in here because I think it's actually important. Sometimes Christians can be uptight when people are using language that they wouldn't use. You wouldn't be able to have a heart-to-heart conversation with Joe Rogan if you go, oh no, you can't use that language. Joe Rogan uses that language to express his heart. And one of the things I appreciate about Wes is he's not fragile. He doesn't panic. He just hears the intent behind the communication. Yeah. One of the things, as you see, this is a 3-hour conversation that Wes has with Joe Rogan, is the conversation weaves all over the place. It is a freewheeling discussion. Wes actually said in another video he had no lists of questions or anything. It genuinely just was a freewheeling discussion. But at the end, towards the end of that discussion, because you see there is trust built and there is a free dialogue, Wes is able to ask a question like this.
In all of this, what do you think of Jesus? Like in terms of your own like journeying and trying to find answers to ultimate questions. What do you think of the historical person of Jesus?
Well, it certainly seems like there's a lot of people that believe there was...
And I had to speed this up. Joe actually spends a lot of time just trying to make sense of Jesus. And can you see what's happening here? Wes hasn't prepared a 10-point discussion about Jesus. He's just asked a question. And Joe Rogan is spending all this time speaking about his understanding of Jesus.
What it can do to people is offer them a very unique way to change the way they feel about the world itself. And if you do follow that, I know a lot of Christians that are hardcore Christians that are some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. So it does work.
So can you hear that? The question was, what do you think of Jesus? And after an extended period of time, Joe gets to the point and says, well, I can see that it does, like believing in Jesus kind of does work.
Right? Like if you do live like a Christian and you do follow the principles of Christ, you will have a richer, more love-filled life.
I think perhaps Christians around the world need to take this excerpt and plaster it everywhere. But can you see how this is great? This is a man wrestling with who Jesus is in the context. And I'm not going to talk about the whole 3 hours, but in the context of a big discussion that is free and open enough that it shows and creates space for a real engagement like this.
So it is true, right? But you have to submit to this concept that this guy was the child of God who came down to earth, let himself be crucified, came back from the dead, explained a bunch of stuff for people, and then said, all right, see you when I come back.
I think he gets the heart of the question. And can you see what he's saying is, but you got to kind of commit. And he's kind of saying, I don't know if I'm ready to commit to something like that.
And you don't know how you can wrap your head around that particular claim.
And if he came back, here's the thing. If he came back, who the fuck would believe him today? With all the fake news and all the CGI and AI, like imagine, that would be...
And again, I've left the language in there, but can you see he's trying to bend his head around what would happen if Jesus came back and then all of a sudden we've got all this CGI stuff and he's actually trying to imagine what it would be like.
The most bizarre thing of all time. If we get to a point where artificial reality is indiscernible from regular reality and Jesus chooses to come back at that moment, boy, that's the ultimate test of faith, right? When it's impossible to discern. If we really reach a point where virtual reality is indiscernible.
And can you see what I appreciate about this? The conversation is now heading off on a tangent, and Wes doesn't feel the need to quickly come back and let's talk about the theological truth. He just goes with the conversation and engages.
Distinguishable from regular reality, which we're probably 100 years away from that or something. Like how far, maybe not even that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's probably why Jesus came in the 1st century and not the 21st century.
But imagine if that's the big catch. Like Jesus does return, but when he returns, we're just so confused that we can't even tell.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's how he returns in the first place. Maybe he returns through AI.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the portal to Jesus.
I don't know anything about that. Yeah.
But can you see, a lot of Christians feel like they've got to jump in and defend and argue. But see, what Wes is laughing, and he's enjoying the rest of it. But he's also saying, "Yeah, no, don't think about it." You know,
I really appreciate. I mean, guys that you're friends with, right? Like the Jordan Petersons and the Douglas Murrays of the world, or
now, can you see what he does here? The conversation's got to a real level, sort of pulled back to kind of a safe zone about AI and stuff. But now he looks for a common frame of reference with Joe Rogan, and says, let's talk about the worldview of some of the people you admire or have a relationship
world, or, you know, the Tom Hollands, not the Spider-Man actor, the historian, who talk about this stuff. I think I really like the way that Jordan Peterson articulates it, but I think he misses the forest for the trees.
How so?
Now, he knows what he's doing here. Jordan Peterson is one of the heroes to lots of the kinds of people, basically young men, who watch Joe Rogan. And so by naming Jordan Peterson, who's on this other journey to wrestle with faith, what Wes is doing is, again, finding a common frame of reference within which to chat to Joe.
In that he sees Jesus as an archetype. And I don't think actually even Jesus gives you the opportunity to see him as the archetype. Because I have this love-hate relationship with all of Peterson's stuff, because he seems to get so much right where he walks up to the line, but he doesn't want to cross over.
And is the crossover, you think, connected to a life in academia?
No.
What do you think it is?
I wonder, and I'd love to talk to him about this, like how do you remedy this issue that, because he seems to think that the concept of Jesus as an example is more important than the actual flesh and blood 1st century itinerant Jewish preacher who was crucified and rose from the dead physically, which is the claim of the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament.
So can you hear this? He's engaging in this is a genuine dialogue with somebody who is open, certainly somebody who's not a Christian, but who is open. And one of the things I appreciate about Joe Rogan is he is genuinely interested in people, and he's very good at asking questions. But this is a genuine dialogue.
That's an example for us to look on and live by. But I actually think that Jesus condemns moralism. And ultimately what I see Peterson doing is looking at Jesus as a moral example. And if Jesus is nothing but a moral example, then you can save yourself and you don't actually need a savior. And so I think actually Jesus would have critiqued that because Jesus was very against moralism. You know, if Jesus is a moral example, it actually misses what I think Jesus actually said about what his purpose was, in that you can't do enough to actually live up to the standard that God holds you to. And so if you keep striving, you're actually going to wear yourself out and be exhausted.
Like atheists.
I didn't say you did, Joe.
But can you see, I don't know if you can see what's happened here. Wes has come in, he's been open, he hasn't reacted, he's shared his heart, he's talked about, this is towards the end of the 3 hours, and at the end of it, Joe Rogan is cracking jokes about atheists.
I didn't say you did, Joe.
A lot of them go crazy. They go crazy when they get older.
Yeah.
Listen, Wes, this is such an awesome conversation, and I'm sad that it went down the way it went down with you and Billy, but the good thing out of it is that a lot of people became aware of your work, and it's such exhaustive work. It's really amazing what you've done. And thanks for, and let's do it again. And I would love to do it with you and someone who disagrees too. I think it would be a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it would be really cool.
This has been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Oh, tell everybody how to find you, how to find all of the different, you have 2 different YouTube channels. You have your own, you have this new one, Apologetics Canada.
Yeah.
So can you see that? Joe Rogan, the biggest media personality in the world, is directing people to an apologetics website, because Wes Huff was able to just have a dialogue and share what he actually knows, but also be quick to name what he doesn't know, which is where I want to land this. Afterwards, Wes, sadly, and this is where Christians, we got to do better. One of the first things that happens, a whole lot of Christians attack him for misquoting stuff. So just in the last 24 hours, Wes Huff has released his own video critiquing himself, because after all, he's been critiqued left, right.
My time with Rogan was amazing, but both myself and others have caught some things I said that weren't correct. And so, in light of that, I'm going to be making a response video to myself.
I think this is a great thing. And can you see, this is self-deprecating and really important. In this world, it's so important not to be defensive, but just to acknowledge what you get right, what you don't get right, and where you are trying to defend getting stuff wrong, you're not going to get anywhere.
I think it's the 10th article of the Mormon Church is that they believe the Bible insofar as it is translated. It's not the 10th, Wes. You lied. It's the 8th article of the Mormon Church that says that.
It's false.
Egypt is like Greece in that you have, like, you can go to the Pantheon and you see that kind of stuff, right?
Pure fiction.
The Pantheon? Are you kidding me? The Pantheon is in Rome. Do you mean the Parthenon?
We made this one up.
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once. I'm pretty sure that's 500. Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. You said it wrong again?
It's a made-up tale.
Ignatius of Antioch, arguing that there are only 4 Gospels. He's in the 2nd century.
It's a total fabrication.
Ignatius? I think you meant Irenaeus. Listen, Wes, even Rogan catches you in your own mistakes. The oils in your hands are more abrasive than latex or even cloth. So
the oils are more abrasive?
No, sorry, I said that wrong. They're less abrasive.
Okay. You are fake news.
I love that Wes has the confidence just to say, look, here's a whole bunch of stuff I got wrong. There was one point, though, that a lot of people picked him up on. What I think I hate is when someone does something online, one of the first things that happens is a whole bunch of Christians want to come in and critique him. But there was something that Wes acknowledged that he didn't do as well as he could have done. So this is his I've edited this down, but this is the point where he acknowledges he did kind of misspeak in the 3-hour interview with Rogan.
There is, however, a criticism I'm seeing online that I think does require some attention and correction on my part. At around the 40-minute mark, Joe asked me a question about the Great Isaiah Scroll. And when he asks me how close it is to the modern Hebrew copies of Isaiah, I say that it is word for word identical to the later Masoretic text. This was admittedly a hyperbolic statement that I should have been much more careful on. To summarize, was my hyperbolic statement to Rogan a dishonest attempt to pull the wool over Rogan and his audience's eyes? No. Was I participating in disingenuous and underhanded apologetic tactics to try and gain points at the expense of truth? No. Should I have been more careful in my statement on Rogan about the Great Isaiah Scroll and used much more precise language, something to the effect of nearly identical rather than word for word identical, in order to not bring unnecessary and unfortunate scrutiny upon my discussion with him? Yes. But I hope you can see why I said what I said, and forgive me for my lack of precision. Discussing the intricacies of textual criticism to a general audience is not always easy, and in the course of a 3-hour podcast, conversational style, pulled off the top of my head on this big platform, I was not nearly as accurate as I should or could have been in this instance.
Yeah. I don't know anybody who could have done it. I mean, I assume there are people who could have done it better, but one of the things I was left with, I couldn't have done it better. Many of the things he spoke about in the Rogan interview, I knew, but kind of knew. He knew. And this one thing that you can read, you can watch his video to unpack it more about whether the Great Isaiah Scroll is literally word for word identical or nearly identical to the modern text. I just think it's sad that people get so caught up in trying to, pull people down.
I am far from infallible. I'm going to make mistakes and misspeak. And I'm going to do it again. Do not hold me to a standard of perfection, because I am not going to live up to that. I will fail that standard. The only person who you should assume perfection of is Jesus. And I, Wes Huff, am probably the farthest thing from Jesus in pretty much every way you can think of.
Well, there you have it. I think it's interesting that Wes finishes by saying, look, I'm going to stuff up again. I'm going to make mistakes. And I think for me, that's one of the big learning points in all this. To engage with people who see the world differently to you, you need to be ready just to own your mistakes and not feel like you've got to have it all together. You don't have to have it all together. I think it's essential that we become the kind of people who aren't fragile, who can robustly engage with people who don't see the world like we see it. And hopefully, as we do that, they can glimpse. I think, like a lot of people glimpsed through Wes's engagements, the truth of what we're about, but also, more than that, the truth of who Jesus is. If we have to feel like we've got to fight for Jesus, then there's something wrong. He's not the God of the universe if we have to fight for him. I think we can trust that he knows what he's doing, and we can relax, and our task is to know our limits and bring the best of what we've got and be quick to acknowledge what we don't have. Hope you found it as helpful as I have.